Hi, bro. How's it going? Chillin', right? If not, just chill, bro. This film tells the story of the financial bubble or economic crisis that occurred in the 2000s era. That event turned out to cause the global financial crisis from 2007 to 2010. It tells the story of four men with a crazy but brilliant idea. And here is their story. The profession of banker in the 70s was not something that could provide prosperity for its practitioners until all that changed when Luis Ranieri came to Solomon Brothers with an idea he had. It is even said that Luis's idea is what instantly changed the face of the American economy, especially in the banking industry. It is told from a true story that at that time, Luis presented his idea to create mortgage-backed security or MBS. Or home purchase credit becomes more profitable for some parties, especially for investment banks that provide loans to all customers or creditors, where each installment paid will become a profit for them. It didn't take long. Bankers who previously could only find entertainment in roadside bars now started to switch to strip clubs and didn't hesitate to splurge their money there. Bankers' incomes were now increasing. Many people began to be able to own their own homes. However, unfortunately, that trend did not last long because 30 years later, precisely in 2008, America began to experience a massive crisis. It even became the worst in recent decades. Unemployment was everywhere, bank debts were immeasurable, making the conditions on Wall Street feel like the effects of a time bomb explosion. Thanks to the idea from Luis at that time. Then the film begins. March 2005, Michael Burry is seen talking with one of the men in his office about the oddity of the numerous mortgage loans that have been given out all this time. Marina onumna on Mariaria. The man, who always behaved strangely, seemed to have above-average intelligence, because this time, as usual, he sensed an opportunity that might rarely be considered by others. Then Michael asked the man in front of him to find data on the top 20 mortgage bond sales that he would investigate unsias tamata, including from various sources he obtained from the internet. Elsewhere, Mark Baum, who arrived late to an important meeting, seemed to have disrupted the event by discussing his recent findings. Where many people become victims because they are trapped in that. Meanwhile, the creditors gain significant profits from the suffering of their clients who fail to pay. Back to Michael, who has spent his days in front of the computer and all the files about MBS, now finds a new fact that the housing credit currently happening in America is dominated by defaulting borrowers. From here, he finally came up with the idea to execute the property market, considering the potential for greater profits is very likely to be obtained later. He then contacted Lawrence to express his idea. Through a phone call, Michael revealed his finding that the banks have been issuing supreme adjustable rate mortgages, which are almost no-condition mortgage programs. This has led many people to take out home loans despite the very high risk of default. From here, Michael realized the potential ticking time bomb where, when many creditors default, many houses will be repossessed by the bank. However, with such a large number of defaults, the value of the bonds will decrease further, and Michael wants to execute it. Hearing that explanation, Lawrence, who had never wanted to take big risks, clearly rejected Michael's idea outright, even though Michael himself was very confident about the great profit behind its execution. Realizing his idea had been thwarted by Lawrence, Michael then began looking for banks willing to realize his idea, including at one bank where he revealed the potential for a very large default on many mortgage-backed securities. And he felt it was time for him to execute the bonds, of course, by betting against the property market. Hearing Michael's offer to buy bonds for a number of MBS at the bank was clearly welcomed by the bankers there, especially since the man wanted to buy them for 100 million US dollars when they were only supposed to be worth 5 million US dollars. Thus, the bank will pay Michael if at some point the value of the bonds falls due to many creditors defaulting. However, if the property market becomes more active and the value of mortgage bonds rises, then Michael is obliged to pay a monthly premium to the bank. An agreement was reached. The bankers, who considered the property industry to be a stable market with increasing prices every year, were clearly very pleased to have a new client like Michael. They even laughed at the deal when the man left the room. Michael did the same with several other banks, until the man's actions became a topic of conversation among several bankers, including Randall. Randall, who had just made a deal with Michael, immediately celebrated it at a nightclub and was overheard by Jared Venet, who happened to be there as well. Jared, realizing Michael's brilliant idea, decided to try his luck. However, he did not buy property bonds, but instead looked for buyers interested in the opportunity. Back to Michael, who had already made a total bond purchase reaching 1.3 billion US dollars, clearly surprised Lawrence, who had never agreed with the actions taken by his subordinate. With great disappointment, Lawrence scolded him on the phone, even though Michael himself remained optimistic that his execution was the right action. At least there is hope that the mortgages will eventually fall in due time. In his office, Mark, who heard Jared's offer about selling bonds, began to gain some insight. However, at that time, he was still not too bold to buy property bonds, until finally, Mark, along with his subordinates, started conducting their own research and discovered various interesting facts. Starting from mortgages that even use the owner's dog's name, creditors' arrears for months, 4 occupied houses out of a total of 100 in a housing complex, unemployed and immigrants who could easily get home loans, including a stripper who could even get credit for 5 houses and 1 condominium easily. Worse yet, the bank even offered an adjustable payment option that allowed each creditor to top up their loan even more, especially when they couldn't afford to pay the installments on the previous loan. In fact, the interest on late installments could reach hundreds of %. This condition will clearly cause a major explosion in the property market, and with all these facts, as a result, Mark instructed his subordinates to buy property bonds from Jared up to 50 million US dollars. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Jamie and Charlie, who are independent traders, are now struggling to obtain ISDA approval to acquire certification that can attract investors to place larger capital in their trading activities. However, it seems that it is not easy, because to obtain that certification, they must already have capital of at least approximately 1.47 billion US dollars. Knowing this clearly made Jimmy and Charlie feel very disappointed. It was as if the hope of being able to develop their business had vanished just like that. Dia dit po sobu. However, by coincidence, the two printas matapos nakitin din na they ended up finding a document left by Jared on the lobby table, and they were immediately enlightened by the potential for even greater profits thanks to a property bond program called Credit Default Swap. They then contacted their fellow trader acquaintance named Ben, who is now known to be living in Singapore after previously being Jamie's neighbor in Colorado. Their idea caught Ben's attention, and eventually he agreed to help them. Thanks to Ben's help, Jamie and Charlie have now successfully purchased credit default swaps with full confidence in the potential for significant profits when a massive default explosion occurs from all the delinquent creditors in America. Credit Default Swap, or CDS, essentially means they are betting against the American property market. If the American property market collapses due to defaults, they profit from this CDS, and vice versa. Unfortunately, the hope of reaping large profits from the worsening American economy has yet to materialize. Even crazier, the banks there seem to turn a blind eye and continue to pour out supreme credit to all their customers without considering the credit application requirements. As a result, property values kept rising, and some parties who had purchased credit default swaps or property bonds are now starting to worry, starting with Michael, who sold all his company's shares to pay the premiums. Jamie, along with Charlie and Ben, who are searching for various information they need regarding the potential economic crisis in America, until Mark and his team continue to dig for other information. Even in his desperation, he ends up buying even more credit default swaps. In short, in April 2007, when Charlie was watching TV and Jamie was still worried about the rising property values, they both suddenly fell silent when a news report aired about the closure of several banks in America. Those who felt there was a slight breath of fresh air even wanted to publish about the corruption of the MBS system initiated by Lewis 30 years ago through the Wall Street Journal, although it seems that the idea could not be easily accepted by the writers there, considering it had the potential to cause an uproar. They also contacted Ben regarding the stock sale they wanted to make. The Sazon trader quickly began offering his best advice. Disamosta. Until then, they reached $80 million for the sale of some of their shares. Interestingly, Ben did this in a bar, which caught the attention of other patrons who mocked the man as if the banking profession was very bad and only profited from the suffering people. March 2008, a meeting of investors was held in a closed room involving Lewis and Mark. Initially, Lewis continued to push his plan regarding the purchase of shares in one of the investment banks, which he claimed had never experienced any problems. Considering the position of investment banks is not risky and tends to be advantageous. However, then the stock value plummeted drastically, even reaching a decline of 38% after Mark revealed the flaws in the MBS system and the supreme credit, which he deemed had forced many people into debt problems. And ultimately, it had the potential to destroy the economy in America at that time. September 2008, Jamie and Charlie finally began to reap the results of their long wait. However, it seems that the profits they gained did not immediately make them happy. Both even appeared gloomy when they saw the empty Wall Street, abandoned by many of its employees. All the workers there and many Americans were forced to become unemployed due to the impact of the collapsed economy in America, including the increasing number of homeless people, because they couldn't afford to pay their installments all this time. The same thing was experienced by Michael. He, who was almost desperate, finally began to breathe a sigh of relief after learning that the banking industry in America was starting to collapse.